Tonight's select board meeting tonight, December 5th, 2022. We have Stephen Whitley, Ken Trom, and Sabrina Dunlap, and Jeff Donahoe cannot join us tonight. And I think Thomas Lapoma will be joining us shortly. So we'll start with points of pride.
Sure. The first is Paula shared with me that actually the rec committee over the last 2 weekends has raised $2,700 for human services through the turkey trot and then the breakfast with Santa.
Awesome.
That's for volunteers, so that's really good. And I've heard good things about Starry Weekends.
Yeah, I was going to say, took part in some of the weekend festivities, and it was great despite the pouring rain. I know lots of time and effort went into that by a lot of different groups, and I thought it was very well done.
I think the three of us were at the festivities Saturday night.
Okay.
I also wanted to note that the Energy Committee had our first meeting, and I'm really impressed with the committee we have.
Anyone else? All right. All right, so first under administrative approval of the consent agenda.
So I'll move we approve the consent agenda of December 5, 2022.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, next is approval of the public meeting minutes from November 21st, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, great. So first, we have a 5:30 appointment with Chris Hodgson. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, about the CIP committee update.
You all know Chris?
I don't know. We've met. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here with us.
Probably he's the new member.
The newest side. So I've served on the SIP committee for, well, since its inception, right? Probably, is that 7 years? maybe?
7 or 8 years.
I don't recall exactly, but it's got a good committee. Includes Don Houston, who's here. Keep an eye on me tonight. So I thought what I'd do is just give you a quick overview of the charge of the SIP committee, and then real high level some of the issues that we dealt with in putting together the 2023 plan, and then I can go through each of the sort of subcategories and answer any questions you may have. Give you an overview of our thinking, how we approached it, and I do think that we feel like the 23 column is fixed in terms of our recommendation. We need to do a little bit of work in 24 through 28. Which is would fill out the 6 years that we look at. So just as by way of background, so SIP committees are a function of state law. We have a specific charge for the work that we do. In Hopkinton, we look at any projects that have a cost of more than $10,000, a useful life of at least 5 years, that are non-reoccurring expenses, or anything that requires bond finance. Those are the types of items that are included in our SIP plan. And it's inclusive of town departments, and the schools as well. So it's inclusive of both. I think as we started to put together the 23 recommendation, it'll come as no surprise to you that the biggest challenge that we all faced probably was the sheer sticker shock associated with the cost increases. Not uncommon to see 20–25% increase for our vehicles. For the project expectations are a little harder to estimate, but we assumed a 20% increase on the projects that we have in the SIP plan, and some of them were even far higher. You'll see that the cost for our trailers at our transfer station, we expected last year to be able to buy 2 at around $53,000. They're $90,000, and that's caused us to have to make some adjustments. So, like everything else, we've seen just very, very substantial increases year over year and what the costs are going to be. And for the first time, we also had to deal with the situation where the year in which we order some of this equipment is not the year in which it's delivered or paid for. So that is a unique situation. If you think about it, we're faced with having to, let's say, order an ambulance in 2024, but we wouldn't actually pay for it or receive it until a year or even 2 years later for some equipment. So that presents a real challenge. Neil's assured us that while we're placing these orders, they aren't hard fixed contracts. So there is still an opportunity for us to make adjustments, but it's something we've just never dealt with before, not having to order that far in advance. I'd also say that
Are you forced to do that, Chris? Just because
it's
the
a practical
supply chain?
matter. Yeah, if you want to receive that tanker, when you want to have it, you need to have an 18-month lead time in the ordering. So it's a reality of it, at least for now. I mean, we could get back to a more normalized calendar, but that's not where we're at right now. The other big challenge that we faced this year was as the staff at the solid waste department becomes better familiarized with that facility, it's become clear that we may well have some really significant capital investments that are necessary there. We started out in our spreadsheet with a $3 million surge plant upgrade, a $2 million pumping station upgrade, and as much as $1 million for removal of solid waste in our lagoons. And that's not the lagoon at the transfer station, that's the lagoon at the surge plant. So those were costs that we had not anticipated. The removal of sludge or the solid waste at the bottom of the lagoon is something we've been planning for. We thought it would be around $200,000, and it's likely to be as much as $1 million because of the technical aspects of that waste and where it needs to go. So you'll see that just for the engineering study alone, to figure out what we need to do and what our timeline might be for doing it, that's $100,000 next year. And compare that with what we thought was in total, perhaps a $200,000 bill for sludge removal. You can just see costs that are really almost exploding, and makes you wonder how sustainable some of these endeavors are. So those are just like real high level. What I can do is maybe in 5 or 10 minutes, just go subcategory by subcategory, give you an update on the changes we made, what our recommendations are for 23. As I mentioned, we look at a 6-year window, which is the blue, the darker blue columns. We have plus a 20 or so year time frame on the spreadsheet, just because some of our equipment is replaced on a 20-year schedule. So to keep everything in there, we go out that far, but our mandate by statute is just the 6-year window. So any questions before I just go through the departments? So in terms of ambulance, last year's plan called for a purchase of an ambulance in 2023 for about $333,000. Because of the lag in delivery, practical matter, that's pushed back to 24, even if it were approved this year. And realistically, the cost is now $408,000. This is a cost item that we spent a lot of time on. We looked at the practical cost of replacing the engine, the transmission, the vehicle we have now. We looked at replacing the equipment that's in it to try to stretch that out. And ultimately, the committee recommends buying new. The savings associated with trying to keep what we have and updating the equipment and updating the mechanicals is it's perhaps $100,000, but then you're starting with a vehicle that's already 10 years old and has been updated. So we recommended just going new. For the fire department, we really were able to keep most all the vehicles on the same calendar. What we see for the fire department is just big increases in the cost of the vehicles, 45% increase in the forestry truck. And somewhat unexpectedly, the need to replace all of our breathing apparatus. We have 24 units currently. That's 1 unit for every seat on any of our vehicles, so that when the truck leaves a fire department, we know there's the equipment that a firefighter would need in the vehicle. We've been on a little bit every year replacement schedule, and because of the way the equipment is certified, we can no longer actually certify it safely. And as a result, have to replace all of them. So in prior years, we were spending about $50,000 to $60,000 a year on breathing equipment. We need to replace all of it for a cost of about $231,000 in 23. So that's a big change from prior years, and has to do with just our ability to certify that equipment as safe. This is outside the 6-year window, but one of the decisions we made in our last meeting was to no longer assume that we would be buying a new ladder truck when our 1997 ladder truck is set to be replaced in 2029. We had been working towards having $1.5 million in that account for purchase of a new ladder truck, and recommendation is to look at one that's used now, which would be, we're estimating perhaps a third less cost. And it's not unusual for vehicles like that to be bought used. The one we have now was used when we bought it. So that's one way that we're trying to trim back on the amount of the appropriation that's required, because that's a sort of purchase we need to plan for years and years in advance. It's one of the biggest item on the spreadsheet. Questions?
Yeah, on the equipment that we replaced, do we end up selling the old equipment? And is that factored into the cost?
It's not.
It's not, okay.
No,
So-
Neil, how does we do sell it and then we recover.
Right, because it goes back to the general fund. It's not.
Got it, okay. And do you have like an idea, so for some of the equipment for like the ambulances and fire trucks, do you have an idea of percentage wise, how much money that is?
Not much, especially fire trucks, because they're either 25 or 30 something years old, and there's not a great market for trucks that old.
But is it like 20% of the value, 10% of the value? Because even like for the fire truck, that's still
Yeah.
several $100,000
Yeah,
potentially.
no, you're talking maybe 10,000 for a fire truck. There just is not a
Really?
market for trucks that old. No, that may change now.
Okay.
But they're old enough that by the time they go, it's hard to get parts for them. So now the ambulance, we should be able to get 50,000+ for that. Then that market has gone up quite a bit.
Cool. All right, thanks.
Unless there's a question, I won't spend a lot of time on the next three. We have known for some time they were going to have to replace the air conditioning units at the library. We had planned on doing it over the course of 2 years. It appears that it's necessary to do it once all at the same time, based on the feedback from that department.
Chris, I actually do have a question on that one.
Okay.
Did you look at alternatives like mini splits as opposed to new air conditioning units?
No, this is to replace on the pad the same type of air conditioning unit. We did not look at mini splits or doing anything on the inside of the building. We would use the same infrastructure that's already there. So other than just unusual inflation, we didn't make any changes to the acquisitions for police cruisers or radio equipment. Reval stays the same. For the town hall, we do have in 2023, and it doesn't require an appropriation this year because there's already 109,000 in that account. But we do have in the plan the expenditure of $75,000 for office renovation in this building. We did move around towards the back of the plan the other renovations or improvements to the town hall that were suggested. But in the near term, it would be those three offices here in this building. And there's no appropriation, there's already dollars in the account to cover it. DPW, partly due to our ability to secure chassis. Last year, we had planned on buying the F-550 small dump. We actually ended up purchasing a 10-wheel dump truck just because it was available to us. So if you look at last year's plan, the 10-wheel dump truck was planned for 2023. It was actually purchased in 2022. The F-550 small dump was the reverse of that. It was planned for 2022, and we were planning on doing it in 2023. And I mean, just generally, this is obviously an area where there's a huge expense, and our capital plan for the equipment we need for DPW is just built around really what the town's expectations are for our ability to clear our streets when it's snowing. I mean, that's what drives what equipment, largely what drives what equipment we need and how much of it. And this meal gets us, is it 4 hours? We hit a same spot on a road.
It is, I think,
And
4 hours.
every 4 hours during a snow event. So that's been the department's goal, and that's what this will allow them to do. They did request, you'll see in yellow, what's called a field maintainer. When we redo the ball fields over at George Park, there'll be the need to have a machine that levels the infields. And there was a desire to purchase that sooner than 2026. And you'll see later in the recreation part, we've moved back some of those investments. So we were able to move back this investment as well. Any questions on DPW? Nothing in the near term for road and bridge, either on the appropriations or expense side, but the culvert referenced here for 27 is on Boundtree. And as the original plan, and as it's currently in the SIP plan, as we saw the last road bond get paid off, we had anticipated putting dollars into road replacement through the SIP. Now, that may need to change, didn't need to change this year, but with the refinancing of the road bond, stretched it a little bit. So, in years to come, we may not be able to keep this, but we didn't make any changes to this year because it's out a few years still.
Those numbers for the yearly road project, are those based just on the amount that's going into bonds right now, or is that based on a different model like
So it was based on when we first made the decision to include these line items, was about 4 years ago. We started doing it on. So we started putting extra money into the road, and so 4 years ago.
It was or maybe
5 years ago. So at that point, what we did was we knew how much we were putting in, which was about 400,000. It was culverts and road. We wanted to carry it out. So you didn't have big peaks and valleys in those expenses. So we just built in as part of the plan, continue to make those investments, even as the bond payments came off. So those have changed around a little bit with refinancing. But that's the basic rationale in there. Dam maintenance is just the concrete overflow here, Kimball Pond, and we're unsure. There was a real emphasis by DES on dam maintenance after Irene. There's not as much focus now on that, and we've accumulated in that account about $60,000. So we feel like if we have to make the investment to do any repairs on the dam, we've got some dollars there. But for now, it's not clear when it'll have to happen. It'll be driven by a decision by the state or DOT, because that's right next to the road, obviously.
Do you know if they tell us we need to repair it with the order of magnitude of that would cost?
So the thought is that this would roughly cover it.
Okay, but I mean, it looks, because it continues to accumulate.
Well, but not in the 6 years that is officially our plan. So
Okay.
you're right, like in
Okay.
theory, as these numbers get pulled forward into our 6-year window, then we would start to have appropriations for it.
Okay.
For the 6 years that is our mandate, we took out all appropriations for it, because
Okay.
the belief is that if we need to do anything there, $60,000 should cover it.
Okay.
So sludge removal, like as I said when I started, this started with, and you can still see them in here, although there aren't any appropriations or dollar signs to dollar expenditures to account for it. Really three really large expenses, up as much as $1 million to remove the solid waste from the sludge from the facility, a pump station upgrade, and then the sewer plant upgrade. We ultimately, our recommendation is not to put those costs in for now in any given year, not to start appropriating for them. We're going to know when and to what extent things need to happen as this engineering study is done. So we do feel like that needs to occur, at least on the sludge removal side. You know, we know that we're at about 20 years plus or minus. That's roughly how long those lagoons should be able to hold the waste we put into them. So we know that could be an issue there. We're in the reasonable window where the work will have to get done. The issue is that it's highly likely that there's PFAS contaminants in the sludge. That's going to limit where we can dispose of it and how we dispose of it, and it could dramatically drive up the cost. So that's how we have gone from perhaps a couple $100,000 expense to perhaps $1 million. But the engineering study will give us detailed understanding of that. So any questions on that? Transfer station, really, we have to make those investments when we have to make them. The reality is that they're just far more expensive than they were in years past. So the trailers, we need 3 of them to continue to haul the volume we're producing, and then they just are now nearly $100,000 a trailer. One thing that we have done here is, you'll notice in 2030, there's $150,000 for a rebuild of the recycling building. That was in the 6-year plan, and we decided to move it out. There's just a lot of uncertainty around recycling in general. And that we felt like that was an expense that we could push off outside the 6-year window.
Can I ask one question on the transfer station, which is probably better for Neil? So operationally, these items to get spent, do they have to be approved by the transfer station committee or so, because like we can't, how does Webster end up paying that portion of it? Does this go into
They appropriate their portion of it.
in a CIP?
Yeah.
So what happens if they don't appropriate it though? What happens if they don't match those numbers?
As part of the agreement, they are required.
They're required to? Well, does that come from our joint meeting or like how do those?
That does, and we give them all this information and they put it in their budget.
Okay.
Prior to that.
Okay. And do those numbers typically go into their capital reserve funds or do they
Yes.
typically? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing. Basically the same as.
Great. Thanks.
And those have been in there, so they do have money appropriated also. And they cover 25%.
So in the vein of something's got to give, recreational facilities, you'll notice that we've recommended pushing off several investments that we had hoped to do earlier and as last planned to do earlier. That includes pushing off until 2025, the reconstruction and relocation of the bathrooms at George Park, to 2027, the well and pump house for George Park to 2025 and 2024, the other two ballparks, and push the skate park renovation or rebuild out to 2029. Yeah, and then just continuing. So the Park Ave irrigation project, push it back a year to 25, Field 2 a year to 24, and then the rebuild on Houston 1 to 2026. And that one actually also comes with a pretty good sized jump in the expected cost. It's been $100,000 for several years now. The new estimate's 150 to do that. And so, really overall, what we're recommending is pushing off these investments on average a year or two to allow us to make other investments that just candidly we felt like were more of a priority for the community, the public safety related, fire, ambulance, those sorts of things. And then lastly is bond payments. So built into this is an understanding or an expectation, I guess, that the road bond for Briar Hill is passed. That is programmed in, if you will, starting in 2024. And then there's the lagoon at the solid waste facility that also needs work. And as I understand it, unlike the sludge removal at the solid waste facility, this is one where we've got essentially a hard date whereby we need to start it. We're mandated by DES to do it. So it's $1 million project, and the expectation is that the bond would start in 2024.
What's the hard date?
What is the date?
It's this coming year.
It's in 24.
It actually is this year, but they're willing to work with us funding wise.
So this is more a hopeful comment than anything in stone, but in doing that work, perhaps we won't have to truck our solid waste from the storage facility out of state, and that facility at the transfer station could accommodate it. That would dramatically reduce the cost of that. So, we don't know that, but it's a question that the engineering study will answer. Because a lot of that cost is just trucking. So that is our recommendation for 23. It's a 5.77% increase over the prior year. That's $84,000, 800 in terms of dollar amounts.
I would just say, for the benefit of the rest of the board, I sat in on the last meeting of the Chris's committee, and they were very thorough, looking at how to balance things out, where things can reasonably be delayed. And it's some really tough decisions that you had to make. And I thank you and your committee.
Thank you. We have Dawn here tonight, but Dave Feller, Jim Fredema, and Amy O'Brien are also members, and everyone does a great job, very attentive, and participates in a great way.
The 2024 is obviously a big spike in.
It's Briar Hill bond.
Yeah, and that's what I was just gonna ask, is that's the bonds.
Yeah, so if that were to not pass, it's I think it's actually a 1% reduction.
1.07.
Yeah.
It's on there is what it would drop if the bond.
Any questions from?
Just for the benefit of, again, of the board, what the CIP committee is recommending for 2023 is what we have in the budget right now.
Mhm.
I guess last thought, the statute prescribes that we also look at the school CIP budget. We're hopeful that we're going to be able to do that at our next meeting. We haven't yet been able to connect with them on what their planning has yielded. So this does not include any capital costs or improvement plan items that are in the school's plan.
All right. Well, thank you and everyone on the committee for all of your hard work on this.
And
Appreciate it.
thank you to Neil. Without whom we could not do it.
That is true for all of us. Thank you. All right. That brings us to old business. And first up is finalization of the 2023 budget. Austin,
I don't have any recommended changes. I think where we ended up 2 weeks ago is where we should end up.
Any thoughts from you, Thomas?
I mean, I always have more thoughts on the road side of things.
Yeah.
I think the number we ended up with, and I think the process where we ended up with in terms of the Briar Hill project and with the increase for ongoing maintenance makes sense. I am a little worried that by putting in shipping and paving, that money won't necessarily be able to get spent and carried over. I'm wondering if that's better put into CIP or something else.
Wait, your concern is it won't be spent or carried over?
Well, so like if it's in the budget, right, and we don't, like, that can't be saved year to year, that can't be. That's correct. Right. And so if the purpose of that money is to be used for longer term ongoing maintenance of the road, then it might make sense to put it somewhere else. Because like theoretically, we'll have less road to maintain next year if we're doing the Briar Hill project. So we're increasing the shipping and paving for ongoing maintenance, but then making less maintenance required, then it just, that money might. Yeah.
I think probably eventually that's the case. But while we're catching up roads, there's not going to really be less road to maintain next year as far as.
No, yeah, right. I just want to make sure that is going into the right place, that it's not, doesn't get lost next year. It doesn't get, I mean, the purpose of that was to have an increase that would be maintained over time.
And did you, I mean, I forget the exact numbers we settled on 2 weeks ago. Do you have that?
It's 520. So total.
For the shipping?
Yeah, I mean, it was, there was a $100,000 increase. And then we also increased it by another 120, I think. Does that sound right?
115, 120.
Yeah.
But I guess what and then what were we doing for the CRP?
Nothing.
Okay, or CRF. That's right. the bottom for that. So if we didn't do it that way, maybe you have some sort of a sense of how much should be.
No, I'm like, I think the amount is right. And as I dug more and more into it, the amount, like that increase amount seemed right.
Yeah, and I'm asking it if you were to change not the total amount, but to move some portion of it into the CRF fund.
Yeah, I would say that amount, that 120.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And we debated that last time.
Right.
But I think to Neil's point, we felt like putting it in the budget helped with our sort of catching up on this historically underfunded area. Yeah.
Yeah, the shimming and paving is increasing from a budgeted amount of 2022 of 389,000 to 530,000 in 2023. Thomas, I guess I agree with Neil that there's, so much, Dan could do. I'm not afraid that he can only spend half of it or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But I agree that, hopefully in a couple of years, he won't have that big backlog.
I think that number is getting closer where it needs to be to maintain 6 miles of road each. We have
Per year.
60 miles of road, and you figure it either needs to be, something needs to be done to it, whether it's chip sealing or top coat or whatever, every 10 years. So you really want to get to the point where you're maintaining 6 roads. You're redoing 6 miles of road every year.
Mhm. Any other thoughts or finalize? Okay. All right.
Do we need a
Officially
motion?
adopt. You want to do the honors, Ken?
No.
No.
You probably want to move to present this to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll move that we present the 2023 proposed budget as determined 2 weeks ago, November 21st, for presentation to the budget committee. I don't know, Neil, if you need more numbers than that. Okay.
Yeah. Just adopt the most recent update that you have.
Second.
All right. All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Thank you. I mean, so much work has gone into this. So thank you to the department heads and Neil and everyone in town who has put in a lot of time and effort, and Ken for being our rep in the budget committee. The work's not done
It's
yet,
only
but
just begun.
I know a ton of time and effort goes into this. So thank you, everyone. Okay. That brings us to our next item under old business, which is the Class 6 road update. Thomas?
Great.
You're looking forward to this?
So much. So we finished up all of our Class 6 roads committee meetings kind of a while ago, actually. So I wanted to kind of wrap everything up, get everything over so that we could discuss it, and then hopefully start progressing with a building policy, which was kind of the goal of all this. So yeah, if you're on the next slide, sorry. So just a recap of the goals, this is kind of what we were trying to accomplish. The main purpose was to identify all the roads and then go through them and determine if there's any purposeful change that needs to be made to any of the Class 6 roads in town. And so first we identified a list of criteria that we were going to use. We went through that. We identified all the existing Class 6 roads. It was actually surprisingly not straightforward. And then we went through, we broke them into 3 different groups, east, west, and south. And then reviewed all of the different roads in town. And then it wasn't part of our charge to discuss potential building policy, but after our last discussion, I then took our initial thoughts on a building policy to the Class 6 roads committee. We discussed it again, and then I'm bringing their thoughts back here so that we can move forward with that part of it. That was like kind of not a formal purpose of the committee, but it was helpful.
How did you guys identify the roads, knowing that it was not straightforward?
There's the list that we have that's given to us by DOT. And then there's also a couple different sources of maps. So there's like Google Maps is one. There's also the tax map. There's also Granite View map. And then there's also Ron Marzak, who knows everything about the roads.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so going through the next slide. So the committee members, just to recap, we try to get someone from the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Trails Committee, and Open Space Committee. We had Jane Bradstreet, Ron, Melissa, and Lucia. And I'm not putting they all kind of run a bunch of these boards together. So they all represented a group of them. There wasn't a specific, I think Jane is the only one from Planning Board, but other than that, they're all on a bunch of those boards. So it was a really broad group of knowledge base. It was really helpful to have everyone there. So to recap, these are all the roads we have in town. This is our official list. Well, this specific list is from the master plan and then also from Karen, which is the list of roads that she gives to DOT when they determine our funding. That's all this is. It's just a list with all of the length of road next to them. But yeah, just a quick recap of the roads that are there. So one of the first things we did, we looked at kind of the things we wanted to look at as we went through the roads. So from the conservation side, I want to look at logging access and value, the fragmentation of the different areas, the having access to certain parcels of land, and then also the historical value of certain areas. For trails, the connectivity of it, being able to connect different parts of the trail systems together in the different parks, biking and hiking use, OHVs and snowmobiles, and then also the concept of kind of a open park, which I think the Trails Committee has been thinking about, which is that the trails, if they are linked all together, is kind of one large park. It's not necessarily just a path. And then also from the planning side, the overall valuation and the value of the land, having emergency access, the rural character, and the ability to develop future, like purposeful future development as part of that as well. So one of the things as we were going through the roads, everything kind of segmented out into, does this road make sense as a Class 6 road, or would it make sense to discontinue or change to a Class 8 trail? There wasn't usually a reason to discontinue a road, although there is one. But for Class 8 trails, we kind of went back and forth a couple times, and towards the end, we came up with kind of a better criteria of a reason why something would be useful to a Class 8 trail. So when we were looking at some of the roads, it was, are they actively being used by walkers and hikers? And a good example is Old Parsonage. Do they provide access to recreational areas like Patch Road, which links into a bunch of different trail systems? And then we found that there are a lot that could make sense as Class 8 trails, but what we found was there wasn't necessarily a reason why we should be specifically suggesting just like hey, this would be potentially useful for a trail. And so when we really thought as to whether or not something should be a Class 8 trail, there's kind of these points of, is there a danger from potential development? So we're going to have a building policy, and if that doesn't address something, is there a specific reason why development might ruin the ability to have something as a trail? Is the road currently used as an active trail? And then is there interest from the Trails and Conservation Committee in converting it or using it as a trail? And then really specifically, is there potential maintenance required for the road and trail? There are a lot of these Class 6 roads that are great trails, would be great trails, could be Class 8 trails, but as is, there's no reason to do any maintenance on them. They are great. There's nothing needs to be done to them. And so if there's no reason to do anything to the roads, and the Trails Committee and the Conservation Committee didn't have a very specific reason why they would want to have it as a trail, then we felt it was best for us not to make a very specific recommendation. So we came up with a list. In our list of recommendations, there are some that are, these could potentially in the future be good Class 8 trails, but it wasn't necessarily, we didn't have a good reason to say right now is a good time for a specific reason to do it. So just in terms of the roads, there's a lot of different Class 6 roads out there. From Old Stone Crusher Road, which is it is extremely hard to find, and when you do find it, you're actually not on it. You're on a logging road, and then you get 5 feet in, and you're hacking through the bushes for like an hour getting lost. George's Road, which is like your standard beautiful Class 6 road lined by amazing stone walls on both sides, linking 2 different roads together. Great hike, amazing. And then Dump Road, which is paved access to the transfer station. Yeah, so it really, it goes all over the map in terms of what we got for Class 6 roads. So in terms of our recommendations, we have a group that's no change, and there's some interesting notes on those. There's a group of no change recommended, but there is potential in the future for Class 8 trails. And the purpose of that is just saying, here's a list, we've done some research into it. In the future, if people are considering it, they should be aware of these roads. This is useful for the Trails Committee to look at as they kind of go into the future, just so that they are aware of this. As people come with potential building requests, we should know about the fact that these have extra value as a potential future Class A trail. And then there's discontinue and convert to Class A trail. So for the no change, I'll just go through the list real quick because there's some interesting notes on there. All of these are no change, but New Road South, which is the section past 89. There's questions about how the access is maintained, because how you actually get to the road isn't part of New Road. It's actually like a maintenance. The land is not owned by the town, it's owned by the state. It's part of their right of way. And it's not really clear how it's maintained or how it would be maintained in the future. Barton Corner Road, there's questions about whether it fully connects through the wetlands. It seems to, the trail certainly does, and you can walk all the way through there, but we're not really sure when they came and did the land grab, whether or not they just cut the road in half, or whether or not it's still the right of way and access still connects through it. Mill Road was specifically the most interesting for potential development. Most of these was not an area that like development would be recommended or anything, but Mill Road seems to be in an area where I think it's in the M1 district. I think it's in the TIF district. And it seems there's just kind of like a big open area where this road kind of goes out into nowhere.
Where's that one?
If you cross 89 on Maple Street, the first left, you take that down, that's Mill Road.
Okay.
And then if the Mill Road kind of goes off into the distance and runs into the park, what I'm thinking of, like on the name.
Aren't there some piles of logs?
Oh, you can't get through it. The road does not, where the road is goes all the way through. And I think it actually goes well into other counties, but you basically run into someone's driveway and that's where the road stops. It's kind of weird. And actually a lot of these roads, and a note for the future is a lot of these roads have been kind of taken over as people's driveways, which is something that might need to be addressed in the future and should be addressed in the building policy. So that's all the notes on the no changes. Notes for ones where we didn't recommend a change, but there is potential for Class A trail. Eugene Footy Road, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It could make potentially in the future a good like trail loop, but Trails Committee didn't have a reason for it. There's no active anything for it, so best to just leave as is. New Road North Side. So this is the portion of the Greenway Trail off of South Road. So what's interesting about this road is because the town owns land further down and abutting New Road, we can maintain it. So that's really important because it is part of the Greenway Trail and we do maintain it as part of the Greenway Trail. But the specific reason why we can do that and it doesn't require changing it into a Class 5 road because we're doing maintenance is because we are land abutters and we can maintain it because of that. And then Petdow Road has a lot of current trail access and a lot of trails that go into to other areas. Buzzwell Corner Road and Old Parsonage, they also had very similar current uses, hiking trails, but the Trails Committee didn't have a reason for it. Conservation Committee didn't have a real reason to do any changes to it. So we just want to make sure that they were known as useful and current active trails for hikers and bikers. And that's why I put them there. And then we recommend discontinuing Dump Road. We can't find any, it might not be a Class 6 road, but everybody listed as a Class 6 road. I can't find any record of it not being a Class 6 road. And so it might just be best as a cleanup to discontinue it. And then converting to a Class 8 trail is Graves Road. And I have another note on that on the next slide. So yeah, so in terms of action items for next, the two big ones. So most of these are just no change, but then there's converting to a Class 8 trail, Graves Road, and discontinuing Dump Road. So Dump Road is really just a cleanup. But then for the Graves Road, right now that's currently an active part of the Greenway Trail system, and it is actively maintained. And that could potentially be problematic. There's no, in terms of the statute, and every time I read a hard road to travel, it feels like things are conflicting and it gets more complicated. And everyone seems to be waiting for lawsuits to just jump up all over the place on this one, but there's no cost requirement for maintenance. And it's not specific that it's maintained for vehicle access. It's just if the road is being maintained. And so if the Trails Committee is maintaining it as part of the Greenway Trail system, that could be problematic. So we felt it was probably best, because it is an active part of the trail system, it is being maintained by the town as a part of the trail system. It should probably be reclassified as a Class A trail, which would allow us to do that. There's a slight complication because the driveway to the abutter on Rollins Road is part of the Class 6 road. And so as part of that reclassification, we need to make sure that that doesn't get taken away, that's just kind of sorted out, but that shouldn't be a problem. And then in terms of, so those are the two big action items, is doing potential warrant articles to do those two roads. And then also in other notes in terms of cleanup, Old Parsonage is still listed as no name on basically all official lists of the road. And I believe it was voted on at town meeting.
No, the select board.
The select board did. Okay, so
When the trail committee put the trail through, that's why I'm surprised they didn't want that to be a trail.
Huh.
Because they came.
they built it right.
And requested that.
Yeah. Right now it still says no name. We should probably clean that up. And then Old Brockway Road exists, but it's not listed as a road anywhere. It's out there in the world through the trees. And it's on property maps and on some surveys, but it's not on any official map we have. So it might be worth, I know Karen was going to do some research into it.
Does that go out through a single owner's property?
I don't think so. I think it used to be a more, like, we found some maps from a way long time ago and it went along the boundary of some properties, but I don't know. Because there are some, where we really found it, the most recent thing are there's some property surveys from a couple of years ago, like 5 years ago, and they list it as a boundary marker. So, yeah. So interesting things for the future. And does anyone have any questions? The rest of it's on building policy. Do you guys have any questions on the roads?
Was there a reason Old Parsonage would not be on the convert to trail list?
It was never brought up as a specific, like, we've heard from the trails. She never said that there was a good reason to. I think where we landed on it was it definitely didn't need any ongoing maintenance as is. And it didn't connect into a broader trail system. Those two things probably push us into the leave as is.
Okay.
Definitely on the side of, like, this is an active trail, like people actively use it, and we should make sure that we know about that. And when people come, if people come for building permits, like, that should be taken into a big factor. But no, that's pretty much it.
All right.
Thomas, for the two roads that have some sort of overlap with the Greenway.
Yeah.
Can you just help orient me for where those are? Like, I've walked the Greenway, but I just
So
maybe not aware of what the names of the roads are, like when you get spilled out on them.
you come down on Old Stagecoach on Briar Hill, and then you walk up Briar Hill, maybe like a quarter mile, and then you cut up. There's where that new culvert was built.
Oh, yep.
And then you cut up into the woods.
It's a left if you're going, yep, okay,
And it does not look like a road. It looks like a trail.
okay.
That's the Class 6 road. That portion that connects.
Which one though? That's
great.
That's great. That's great.
That's, okay,
Yeah.
thank you, okay,
So that's Graves that connects Briar Hill to Rollins.
okay.
And then new. Is the.
And then New is the other one. Yeah, sorry, that's the other one. New is the one behind, you go to the Cracker Barrel, walk down South Road, and then it cuts off into the woods.
Yeah,
That road is New Road. And that goes all the way to 89,
right,
and then connects basically on the other, straight across 89, it keeps going And it keeps going for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And
Double.
it's worth noting the other section of New Road across 89, I think used to be in much worse shape. And then there was a bunch of logging that was done and they did a pretty good job maintaining the road. It's a really great hike. It's really nice up there.
They came and got approval from the board when they did the logging.
Yeah.
To bury the road.
Cool. So when we started talking about a building policy, in terms of a starting point, so we had come and talked about it here for a little bit. I took our notes back to the Class 6 Roads Committee. We discussed it, and this is kind of our more defined starting point. So where everyone tends to land on in terms of the process, and again, this is just a starting point for discussion. But generally, to allow within 300 feet of a Class 6 road, a building permit. And all of the building policies have the exact same language, which is, this is what would be allowed, but this is not a lot, like, you have to meet many requirements across a lot of different things for you to actually get a building permit, but this is generally the maximum that would be allowed. That's a better way to put it, is like, the language is very clear that this is the maximum would be allowed. You still have to meet a lot of requirements for even that. And the purpose of that 300 foot is it matches the same frontage requirement of the R4 districts. So this is basically saying the parcel that's at the end of a Class 6 road would be allowed to have a building permit. And that also matches with the other cases in town where building permits have been allowed. That generally tends to fit all those other existing cases that have come up in the last 15, 20 years.
And Thomas, that 300 feet, if I remember when we had discussions before, for other towns, that fell within the same.
Yeah, for the ones that had them, it did. I thought that a lot more had that exact same number, and it turns out that a lot of them don't have any number at all. A lot of them tend to be unclear and more permissive. But in terms of the ones that did have finite numbers and be pretty well structured, this 300 foot tended to be about right. And then also, so in the process, so that would be kind of the starting point. There would be a very clear waiver of liability. Everyone is very, very specific on this, that everyone needs to be very clear on the waiver of liability. A clear outline of the application requirements, which would likely be very similar to the planning board requirements for their application process, just to keep things kind of standardized. A very clear timeline for the application of how long you have to apply for it, how long the application is going to take. And then from there, a clear timeline for how long you have to actually start building before it goes away, the approval goes away. And then having planning board, this was coming through the Class 6 Roads Committee, a lot of the comments were more about, this is stuff that the planning board should be looking out for specifically when they make comments or potentially approve any Class 6 building permits.
They don't approve them.
They don't approve, right. Well, that could, right.
Yeah, they're required by statute to comment.
They're required by statute to comment, right? And so that's where a lot of the things that the Class 6 Roads Committee should be looked at, they felt it would be best if the planning board is likely in the best position to be looking at a lot of these things, like the driveway location.
The DPW does that.
DPW does that. So that would go into the DPW, sorry. Utilities access, emergencies access, wetlands, and other type of planning features. Basically all the things that the planning board should look at, they should be making comment on. And then another important note was the DPW should approve any road changes prior to actually starting building. We definitely didn't want to get into a position where a change to the road was approved and then they just start building without doing the change to the road, or they screw up the road or do something to the road that screwed that, right? So having a process where DPW would have to change whatever changes were required to the road, DPW would have to not approve the changes, but once the construction was done on the road, then DPW would say, yes, this has been done. And then they could start building whatever that was permitted.
I wanted to go back for a moment, clear timeline for building.
Yeah,
What is building? Is it just digging a hole?
great question. I don't know. That's a good thing to clarify.
We have guidelines under the building permits, so I would assume they'd be the same. But you could determine that in your policy.
And then in terms of the road features, like what would actually happen to the road? This is kind of where it gets a little bit more thorny and sticky. So there's no specific standard of saying like roads should be upgraded to a standard or roads should not be touched at all. It definitely came to a place of it really depends on a lot of stuff. And it also was not clear if we were going to say a road needs to be upgraded to a standard, what that standard should be, because a lot of things can change. Like we don't want to have a lot of the other example building permits or building processes. They have kind of like this is what the road's going to look like. Like if you're going to get a building permit, you need to upgrade your road to this standard. And a lot of them are potentially a higher standard than the existing class 5 road that's abutting it. So we didn't want to say you need to upgrade to like a really high standard when that would be totally out of place. Like we don't want to say you need to pave the end of the class 5 road. That would be kind of weird. So it's not super clear. This kind of an open question does there need to be an upgraded road at the end? Like, does the applicant need to upgrade the class 6 road to the class 5 standard? What is that standard going to be? And then how do we specify it? And a potential thing they came up with was upgrading to match the standard of the existing class 5 road, but that's also a little hard to define. So it's kind of an open question. Everyone seems to be very much in agreement that the road is to be maintained by the applicant. Almost all the other existing building policies tend to take the assumption that the town is going to take over the road eventually. Maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years, but the road's going to be upgraded. The building policies, the building permit's going to be issued, and then the town will maintain and take over the road. Everything so far has been very specific about the town will, in this case, the town will not be accepting and maintaining the section of road. So that needs to be very specific. But in terms of what that portion of road looks like, I think is still very much up for debate. Yeah.
Can I just give you my sort of running
Yeah, definitely, please.
remarks? So on the process side, I mean, I understand the logic of having some of those functions be done by the planning board. I guess my response to that is, you know, the select board really has the responsibility over roads. And so I wonder if, as it's been written there, is maybe giving the planning board too much of the authority that we as the select board should be exercising over the road part of it. And I also don't know if it's appropriate to have wetlands and other planning stuff under the planning board, because it's not like a typical site plan or subdivision review. It's really a pretty limited review dealing with the road.
So I totally generally agree. I think it gets, as you go into potential example cases, it gets,
It's harder, yeah.
it gets hard.
Yeah.
So like, if they don't have to go before a planning board review, is there no wetland
Well,
review?
they have to go before the planning board because the state law requires it. So they have to go before the planning board for comment, but it's not a formal.
No, right. So I'm not suggesting that the planning board needs to approve a permit.
Oh, okay, okay.
I mean, I think that is not necessarily a bad idea, but I'm not suggesting it.
Okay.
But I do want to make sure that all of the stuff that the planning board would normally look at doesn't get circumvented because they're on a class 6 road.
But I think that if they're coming for a class 6 building permit, it's just going to be for a single family or a structure or something like that. And so I think doesn't require the same sort of typical planning board review because it's just a limited sort of scope of development that's happening. And sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
And so, like for the wetlands,
Yeah.
you just mentioned, I think if the wetlands relate to the road and like the placement of the driveway or something having to do with access to the structure that's going to be built, then that's maybe fair game for the planning board or for us to consider. But I don't think that the planning board or us as the select board has the ability, if it's just a single family building permit request, to say, tell us where the wetlands, map the wetlands on this lot.
But so
Which is a typical planning board function, but not in the context of.
no, I agree though. Like, I agree with you, but what happens if, so like on Buzzwell Corner, which all of that property abuts a bunch of wetlands.
Yeah.
What happens if someone says, I have this road frontage that's right, it's the first, say 10 feet right there, like not a big deal for the road access, but they want to put their house on the wetlands.
Yeah.
Do they just circumvent that entire review process?
I mean, I don't know our building regulations chapter and verse, but I would assume, and maybe that's wrong, that there is some prohibition about putting a structure inside a wetland.
It'd be no different than if it was on a class 5 road or a class
Yeah.
4 road, or
So
you have to meet the wetlands
they
requirements.
have to,
Whatever the zoning or wetlands requirements are, they still
they
have
have
to
to
meet
meet,
those.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Would that be
That's
something?
beyond the access on a class 6 road. That's kind of separate.
Yeah.
You still have to meet all the building permits.
Yeah, I think, so one of the problems when the last one went through and it went to comment at the planning board, it was very unclear what the planning board's purpose was
Yeah.
in that
I
case.
totally
Yeah.
agree.
And to me, I agree with I definitely agree with you on that. I think the next step after we decide a lot of these things, I think, is to have the planning board come up with a criteria of like, what are the things that they would think about as, like, so we put up emergency access here, but like, do they have a better idea of what that would be?
I think that's a board.
Yeah.
Okay, then yeah.
And I mean, I don't at all mean to disparage the planning board or their role when they're doing a typical planning board review, but I think, they are gonna want to do something close to their typical planning board review. And I just think that's beyond the scope of what this whole policy is intended to sort of address. And I don't blame them for wanting to do that because they are on the planning board. It's what they like to do. It's part and parcel of what they actually do. But this is sort of a different kind of.
So I agree with you. What is the difference though? Like, what are the things that they would do in a normal review that they would then not have?
I mean, they have a whole checklist of information that they want, wetlands, topo, building envelope. I mean, I'm not even on the planning board, so I'm probably missing a whole bunch of them, but those sorts of things are not necessarily appropriate for something like this, I don't think.
They would not be doing that for a single family home
Right.
anyways.
Got it.
So
Yes, then I agree. Then I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
And what's it say? Oh, the road standard. I think we do need to define, well, I guess, let me back up. I have concerns about saying you've got to bring it up to class 5 standards. Because what I worry about is 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the line, we're going to get a petition from some of those owners saying, we want you to accept this road. It's already brought up to class 5 standards. So that cost, it's already a sunk cost. So all we're asking you to do, town, is to take on the maintenance of the road. And it will, I think, make it more difficult for us to say no to those sorts of requests if the road in question is already at a class 5 standard. It's like a slippery slope. And I just don't know if we want necessarily to convert that entire road to class 5, because that obviously has some bigger developmental repercussions if it's all class 5.
Isn't that covered by Thomas's last note?
I don't think that we can say, we're not going to accept.
No, I mean,
future.
I agree with you. I don't, it's
From a
it's not
policy
easy.
standpoint,
Yeah, no, I
I agree, but I mean, I just don't know that legally we can do that.
right. I mean, like, I think we need to have a building permit. Sorry, not a building permit. We need to have a building policy. Like, we need to have some
Yeah.
sort of policy. Our policy can't say you're not allowed to build. But then also everyone else's building policy makes the assumption that they're gonna take over the road. And how do we make?
And I don't, well, I think that, well,
I agree.
and that leads to my next sort of comment is that rather than it being class 5 road standard, it's something lesser. So it's sufficient for basically emergency access, but not necessarily class 5.
Yeah.
And I know some places use the fire department, their access road requirements in the fire code, which I think is like 20 feet width all season, and some other stuff, which I can't quote to you, but it's a lesser standard than class 5.
Yeah.
And, arguably it provides sufficient access for emergency vehicles. So that concern is hopefully addressed, but it's still not up to class 5. So if somebody did want to convert to class 5, it would still be a significant cost that they would have to either ask us to do or take on themselves. And I forgot.
I think that sounds extremely reasonable.
I was going to tie that into what I just said, but yeah. And I think the fire department, they do include like grade and drainage and some other of those things. So I'm sure
That solves a lot of problems.
yeah, I'm sure we could ask, Chief Yale or someone to, give
There
us
are
information.
driveways that have been put in that are more than 1,000 feet have certain requirements.
Yeah.
And you can match those.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can match those.
And then I already mentioned it, but the last one, anybody under state law has the ability to come in and ask to lay out
Yeah, right.
road. And so I worry about us and a policy saying we're taking that ability away from you.
No. I'm not saying it should be in the policy. I'm saying in terms of everyone's agreement so far, their comments have been pretty clear on the desire to maintain that.
Oh, by issuance of the building permit, you mean we're not?
Yeah, so
Oh, yeah.
like a lot of the other building policies, they kind of just, some of them even just say like, we're gonna start maintaining the road.
Yeah.
So it's more of that.
Yeah, if we're talking about language that's in the policy that says, by issuance of this permit.
Yeah.
We're not making any representation about accepting the road, then I totally agree with that. Yeah, okay.
I bet some of the fear is because every time if you bring it up to class 5, you're extending that. It's
Right.
one of the creep
That,
factor.
that was like a very important feature is that we did not want to have a slippery slope creep factor. And if there's any changes by the town, then that's exactly what happens. You keep just extending it by 300 feet and we want to at all costs avoid that.
So bigger picture process thought / question, seems like there's consensus, we should have a policy. So, I think I'm talking about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sort of ad hoc
Yeah.
group, right? Lucia, Ron. everyone.
Yes, yeah,
okay.
everyone.
So the recommendation is to have an actual policy. In terms of creating and adopting a policy, can you refresh my memory on, we just,
The
Draft it,
board
talk
can-
about it,
this is
and then-
your prerogative.
Yeah, and
okay,
I have like next steps on that too.
oh, good, okay, I need to get ahead of you. Okay.
Yeah, we can go to the next steps. I mean, some of my next steps are like basically talk to the planning board about getting their input, but I think a lot of your points Stephen, are really, really good. So the first step is we would decide these major features, decide what we need in terms of input from the planning board, if at all, maybe not. And then write a draft policy, and then we'd probably there's a couple of existing, very well-written existing draft policies that have a lot of these features in that I could make sure that all of our comments are kind of in there. And then we would hold a public hearing and approve it. I believe that's all we would need to do to have that. And to me, the bigger question is, what are the big major features we want to make sure, and then what do we need from planning board? Before this conversation, it wasn't even clear to me whether or not we'd want it to be a very narrow just comment, or whether we want to have a more broader approval, but I think
You
what you're
write
saying
the
is-
policy
Yeah.
and come with a policy you like, and then ask for planning board comment
Yeah.
or anything they would. But I think anytime you're dealing with roads, it's one of the few things actually the select board.
And I don't think, even though if it was a good idea to give the planning board sort of an approval, I don't think we can do that, because I think.
Right.
No, I
to just
tend to agree with you on that one.
Yeah,
I tend to agree. I want to make sure the question.
I think
Yeah,
it's
no.
unclear, like
Yeah.
what their role is. That part is clear.
Oh,
That we need to-
and I absolutely agree that we should figure out, give them some guidance, because I'm sure it's frustrating and difficult to be like, what are we supposed to
Yeah.
do with
Yes,
this?
it's basically, the last time it was like a bit of a circular conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question is, in terms of the driveway layout, putting in specific language about trying to minimize the length of the road required and that sort of thing. Not totally sure how to specify.
Do we have driveway regulations, right?
Yeah.
I think they would apply.
But do they do things like? They wouldn't try to minimize the length of the road because there would be an existing road there.
Right, so they would give like site guidelines and things
Okay.
like that, but they don't necessarily, the assumption of those is that you have a class 5 or better road.
Does the zoning ordinance put a cap on how long your driveway can be?
I believe it may, or there may be certain requirements after a certain,
Yeah.
because I know there have been required sprinkler system or the fire.
Right, yeah.
Somewhere in there are.
So there may be something in the zoning ordinance about that.
I can dig
Or
through.
a statement that the driveway should be as close to
Yeah, I think probably we'll end up
a
in.
class 5 road as possible.
Yeah.
So since you have
Oh, yeah,
done
I
all
mean,
this
I
work,
already have,
of your draft.
I have all
Okay,
these
okay.
copies.
Okay, good.
I'm happy to.
You guys did such a good
You
job.
did. Thank
It
you
really
to
is.
everyone who helped out.
So thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah,
To you and everyone that was on. the
it's been
That was a
super,
slog, but you guys
it's
did a
been
great
super
job.
fun.
In a better time frame too, which is.
Yeah, we kept it tight.
You did, you did.
I can't say it's fun and you keep a straight face.
Well, we
So-
went hiking on everything. the
There-
trails.
Hiking was that fun.
So we can talk maybe in the next. I don't know.
Mid-January, probably.
Yeah,
I probably won't be at the next meeting.
yeah, totally. So we can move forward with,
I'll add to the warrant. The
Right.
discussion,
Yeah,
your recommendation.
yeah, definitely, we should talk, yeah, great.
So it's on there in that first.
yeah. We have a public comment section, but yeah, if people are wanting to speak on thoughts and reactions, sure.
I have basically two questions. How many new permits and new housing locations identified with all of this effort?
Like potential new ones? Pretty small number, like in terms of total number, it's, I don't know, probably less than 10.
What's the driving force to do this?
The driving force to do this is, this came up last spring and there was no defined process for it. It went one way, then went another way, and then ended up here, and we had no ground rules of this is how we should be evaluating it. This is the things we should be talking about. It's just open for it. And I think a good example of how that can go wrong is Buzzwell Corner, which over the course of 10 years had the same issue come up multiple times with multiple different outcomes, depending on kind of who was around at the time. So it's just, there's no ground rules, there's no outline, there's just kind of open question of how things should or could work.
I realize the one about treating is legal. A legal concern why we basically allow them to do that. But I'm envisioning sort of what you said. If we do this 10 years down the road, we're going to have another whole wave come in and say, hey, I want to go just like you did 10 years ago, or another thing. And then we just keep doing this over and over again. We get away from the idea of keeping and preserving class 6 roads for trails and keeping the housing development down and control. I see no, for 6 houses, I see no reason to all of this effort, other than the fact that coming up with some kind of legal statement that the select board can say, hey, you can or you can't do it.
So specifically, this would never allow that process to go further and further and further. So if a building permit is approved by someone, that section of road still stays as class 6 road. And there's no ability then for the people beyond to then be able to come based on the building policy. The people beyond would not be able to come and ask for that to be extended. Anyone can always come to the town meeting and request to have it extended, or to change it to a class 5 road, but this process would not allow the slippery slope to happen. It would very specifically define this is where it can and this is where it can't, but it would not allow it to keep pushing forward.
So in essence, all this will be done to about 6 potential buildings, and that would be the end of it.
Well, I don't think the existence or non-existence of a policy changes our reality. I think that the fact that we had sort of a challenging experience dealing with this spring showed to us a lot of towns have policies on this, and it probably was, you know, it's a gap that we don't have one. And so I don't think that changes sort of like the town view on the topic. I think it's just putting it in. I mean, even just getting our arms around what exists for class 6 roads was super useful. So I think, you know, this is all part of the process of putting this in sort of like an organized fashion for us for the future. If this comes up, we've got something to follow. So.
And yeah, like that 6 number, that less than 10 number, that's the number of kind of properties that exist right at the end of a class 5 road. That's not the total number of, I mean, you could take Buzzwell Corner and you could chop that up into a bunch of small lots. And then with no building policy, there's no reason why anyone couldn't just come say, can we make this into a road and build all of it?
But this policy prohibits.
This policy would prohibit, well, not prohibit, it would give guidelines to the select board to say that should not be allowed.
And I just want to add one thing. I mean, you know, the class 6 roads that are in town, I mean, that's a number that can change. I mean, class 6 roads, more could be created, and then we'd have more potential lots where people may want to come do this. And so, you know, even the less than 10 number is kind of a snapshot in time and may change. And so if we have some sort of a policy in place, the owners out there will understand the town's expectations and their own limitations for whether or not they can build. And it gives us and the planning board sort of a uniform set of criteria that we're applying to everybody that does come forward, which makes it better for us. And I hope better for the property owners that are thinking about doing it, because they know, you know, if I'm within X number of feet from the class 5 road, I've got to do X, Y, and Z. And if I'm beyond that, you know, I probably am not going to be able to get a building permit. And right now we don't have any sort of clarity like that.
And I actually think that's a really good note, because there have been, through all the discussions, there were a couple of very clear examples of people were told one thing by realtors when they were purchasing land, that all they had to do was come talk to the select board and they'd get a building permit. And if we don't have a policy in place that they can look at and say like, no, that's not really the case, that's what they think.
It's also helpful for staff so that we know what the policy is, because right now the policy is, well, state law says you could request this, the likelihood of getting it, but having something clear that's across the board that you can show somebody is really helpful.
This will argue that not of the state circumstance override, you have this state in writing as a policy. So the next president of Boundtree can say, I want to build another 300 feet beyond where this current one is. I just want to do it once. And you can say, no, you can't do it. The state approach could not take that to court.
The state gives us the ability to craft a policy. And if we do that, then I think our position to say no is a lot stronger than without.
Yeah.
Started when we, 60 is the maximum building units in town for any given year. We had a policy and we stand behind it.
Yeah.
Or if someone comes in and they're 1,000 feet in, we can give to them, here's, before they buy the property, here's the policy.
Right.
That the likelihood of you getting.
Yeah.
It's only 6 or 10, that's not a big deal. It's in town, we can absorb that.
And sorry, just one more thing on that too. Also, it's not saying these are the things that's allowed. It's saying we certainly past that is not allowed, and you still have to meet a lot of requirements, and you have to have a really good reason, and it has to make sense to do all of these things. It's not it's not meant to be, at least to me, it's not meant to be these areas are now allowed to build. I don't know if that makes sense.
Catherine, if you want
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Stephen on not having it brought up to the standard of the class 5 road. Because I do think that what would happen over time is that people would then come to the town and say, we've invested in bringing it up to the standard of living there. Can we change it to a class 5 road? And then you go. I also do wonder about why we have to go 300 feet. I know that's the frontage in an R3 or an R4 zone. But it almost seems like that sort of helps with the slippery slope because you can allow it up to 300 feet. And then somebody could come back a few years later with the argument, well, there's a house there, that section of the road is safe, it's been maintained to the point where fire trucks and police could get there, so why can't I go to another 300 feet? I almost think not having any number there, or certainly having a lower number, it doesn't take you all the way out to the required frontage, would be better. I also question whether it might only be, say, 6 houses. On Boundary, for example, this would open it up to houses on both sides. So on any road in town where you're allowing a house to be built, you're really allowing another one on the other side of the street as well. And I guess my last comment would be a question where there was a reference to when we had a cap on how many houses could be built in any one year. I wonder if it's possible to put a cap on how many permits could be issued on a class 6 road at any one time frame as well. That would be good for everyone. And I guess I would just like to see when the policy is drafted. I looked at some policies in other towns, and Durham in particular stuck out for me because it started with sort of a mission statement. The policy was designed in order to discourage building on class 6. And I really would like to see a policy drafted. I think it's helpful to state that, but also to make sure that all of the criteria listed are for that purpose. Thanks.
Thanks for the comments. Anyone else on this issue? Okay. Well, thanks for your questions and comments. And I think, questions about like the 300 feet or details we'll definitely discuss and take more comments and thoughts on as we actually draft a policy or discuss a draft. Discuss a draft. Okay.
Can I make a motion to disband the Class 6 Roads Committee?
Um,
Well,
was it officially?
the purpose of the Class 6 Roads Committee was to, it had nothing to do with the building policy. It was to go through the list of the roads, evaluate them and make a recommendation for each road, which I feel like we've done. So there's no real purpose less.
Do we need to officially adopt a motion to
I think it's a
disband?
great idea.
Okay, all right, good, okay,
Would you like to make that motion?
I would like to make a motion to disband the Class 6 Roads Committee.
okay,
I'll second.
all right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And with many thanks for all of your work.
Yeah.
Okay, that brings us to new business, and first up is the 2023 holiday schedule.
Sure, there is nothing unusual in 2023. So it's pretty much the standard thing. Sometimes we end up with weird days, but everything is pretty standard. New Year's all the way through, but every year we bring this forward so you can adopt it.
All right,
Like in 2024. Christmas and New Year's are on Tuesday, so the question will be, do you open Christmas Eve? But this year, there's not gonna happen.
yeah, okay. Anyone have edits, concerns? All right, do you need a motion to adopt?
Move just to adopt.
Okay,
I'll move.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, great. And next up is year-to-date financials.
Probably the biggest thing to report is there's nothing really unusual in these numbers. They're really pretty much where we would want them to be. Note a few, for example, cemeteries are slightly over, but that will come out of the trust funds. It's $500 right now. We've talked before about insurance. That was a claim that was actually paid in 2021, but the expense was in 2022, so that's why it shows that way. Down to emergency management, that was a $50,000 equipment grant that will also not show. Solid waste cleanup is the $2,000 that's over is the added expense from the lagoons that we've experienced this year. For the most, actually, this shows capital reserve payment or capital outlay. That's the Tyler Road Bridge, which shows there. Usually we don't show those bottom ones, but we're just having a hard time with my report function. Other than that, most of the ones that are 100% are done for the year already. There was payroll today, so that wasn't included, which covered November payroll. So the payroll numbers are all, there's still 3 payrolls left this year that aren't in these numbers. Other than that, we seem to be pretty much not as close as we were last year, which is great. And knock on wood, there has not been snowstorms, which can change the October, November, and December month numbers dramatically.
So Neil, for year end, are you anticipating a very minimal contribution to fund balance?
I'm not anticipating any yet.
Very minimal. Okay.
And I knew you'd ask that question.
What about revenues?
What about revenues?
Yeah.
Today's the 5th, so I don't have the November revenues yet.
Could you supply
I will
the
have them by
October?
Wednesday. You've gotten the October ones. At least
Did
twice.
the budget committee?
The
They did,
budget
okay.
committee got them last month.
Okay. For 2023, we're changing the accounting methodology for the economic development position. Did that change start now?
No,
'Cause I'm
that's for
looking at-
2023.
Okay, because I'm looking at the salary for that position.
We may not have done the transfer yet.
Okay,
Some of the transfers, most of the transfers are done, but maybe not.
okay, because I was concerned it was running. Okay. And sort of following up on what Thomas's earlier question was with highways and streets. Does Dan anticipate basically using all of his shimming and paving?
Yes, well, as we've talked about, we'll encumber.
Okay, that was what I was expecting you to say earlier to Thomas's question, that you can encumber.
To a limit though, right?
To a limit.
You can't,
Mhm.
so if like we had
Okay, just make sure we're on the same way.
You don't really budget to encumber.
No, okay. That's all I had.
Okay. All right, thank you, Neil. Any town administrator updates?
Sure, we did receive, just after your last meeting, notification that we did not receive an LCHIP grant for the barn. We are not in that mix. The surveyor, I was going to say the assessor, the surveyor is working on the Horseshoe Tavern. The problem we're running into is the amount of land that's available, so we're working with DES. to try to determine that, because hopefully we can include the septic and that which is on the other side of the road. You'll see, which you signed, I think tonight, that we sold one of the tax deeded properties back to the previous owner, which is always a good thing. We received full payment for that, which includes all back taxes through this, they're through December of this year, or through the December payment of this year, plus any fees, plus there's a penalty, a 10% fee for going through that process. That's it. The largely budgets, CIP.
All right.
Really?
Would anybody like to make a comment? We're at public forum. We have anyone online?
We do not.
Okay. All right. So do we have anything for other?
Budget committee is meeting Wednesday at 5:30. Whoever is interested
Good time.
Where is that meeting?
here.
Oh, it's here. Okay. All right. I don't think we have a non-public. No. All right. That brings us to adjournment.
So moved.
Second.